Hi, everyone. Welcome to the eighth and final session of Visualization in Practice, MVIS 5702.1. This week, we'll be finishing up our time together by looking at some case studies and reflections on visualization in practice in the wild. During our 8 weeks together, we've explored tools, techniques, and process. And I hope that one of the things that you've seen is that at its core, data visualization is about communication. How do we show complex information in clear and compelling ways? And I hope you've taken away that doing this doesn't necessarily require complex applications or visuals, that sometimes simplicity is best, particularly when we have an audience that isn't that familiar with our information or our data, and when we're trying to drive them to clear action. And I hope that also when we look back at the objectives for this course, learning how to critique, learning what the profession of data visualization looks like, and finally learning how to iterate on a portfolio quality piece, that regardless of what we're trying to do and the question that we're trying to answer, the goal is the same: to show relationships, trends, and other insights that might otherwise remain hidden. I haven't shown this graphic yet during our time together, but I think it's a really relevant one. This was essentially what got me into data visualization. This is Edward Tufte's uh, example of Napoleon's March. So this was by a Dr. Menard, who was uh, a cartographer and a manager of bridge building and other infrastructure tasks in France in the mid 18th century. And he produced this chart showing Napoleon's march into and out of Russia during his disastrous invasion of 1812. And so, what's extraordinary about this graphic is that it shows 6 dimensions. It shows a geographic dimension, latitude and longitude. It shows time. It shows temperature. It shows the direction of travel of Napoleon's army, and it shows the army's strength. And you see how it moves from that very thick brown line when it crossed into Russian territory, compared to that little tiny black line after it returned straggling back after a disastrous winter campaign. So Tufte calls this the best statistical graphic ever drawn. I think it's a really salient one. I'm not sure whether it was the best one, because often when I've shown this to colleagues and other people in presentations I've given, sometimes their eyes tend to glaze over. So what I wanted to do this week, as we sum up our time together, is I wanted to show some case studies of where data visualization really worked, and where we can take away some clear, actionable insights. So, first example I wanted to give is comes to us from W.E.B. Du Bois, who was the first Black recipient of a doctoral degree from Harvard. He got his doctorate in sociology, but his long career also touched on politics and even sci-fi writing. He actually wrote a science fiction story. And so this example I call Visualizing Black America, a Generation After Reconstruction. So again, W.E.B. Du Bois was the first Black scholar to earn a Harvard PhD. For the 1900 World Exposition in Paris, he assembled a team to document the state of Black America 35 years after emancipation. So what he did was he pulled together a team that created and hand drew a series of data visualizations about the state of Black America. These images are from Du Bois's exhibit. It was actually a visual real life exhibit that was done in Paris. It actually received awards from the exposition. And really, what it shows is the degree of change in 35 years in terms of wealth and holdings. It shows the distribution of people. It shows the relative size of the Black community compared to other European countries. It's really extraordinary. If you're interested in learning more, I can send you some examples, including a Medium article, and there's a wonderful book that was published containing all of the visualizations. The next example involved getting B-17 bomber pilots home during World War II. So here I'll use a situation, action, result framework. The situation here is that across the 4 years of World War II, more than 50,000 airmen, Allied airmen, lost their lives. The B-17 bomber was the main bomber airplane that was used in these campaigns. The average crew was under age 25, and the survival rate was under 50%. Just to illustrate this, on October 14th, 1943, which was known as Black Thursday, the 8th Air Force attacked a ball bearing factory at Schweinfurt, Germany. This was beyond the range of the Allied fighter escorts, and 60 out of the 291 bombers, so that's about 20%, were shot down with some 600 flyers lost. So at this point, someone named Abraham Wald enters the story. He was homeschooled in the Austro-Hungarian Empire and emigrated to the US at the beginning of World War II. He was Jewish, so being in the Austro-Hungarian Empire that was taken over by the Nazis over time was not safe for him. So he came to the US, got a degree at Columbia University, and worked in its statistical research group. He was put to work on determining how to minimize bomber losses. So what he did was he plotted the locations of bullet holes on the bombers that returned home. And based on these data and looking at where these bombers were hit and damaged that returned home, he was able to develop a predictive algorithm for what areas on the bomber should be reinforced. And so if we look on the next slide, this is a different kind of bomber. It's not a B-17. A B-17 was a four-engine airplane. But what you can see here, looking at this top view, is that the surviving planes in this two-engine model didn't have hits in their engine areas or in this part of the fuselage. This is a better view. This is an actual B-17. And the surviving planes that came back had been hit kind of in the middle of the plane. They had been hit behind the engines, not on any of the control surfaces. And so based on this visualization, Wald was able to recommend to the bomber crews that the places that didn't have red dots were the ones to be reinforced. So those would include the forward fuselage here, the vertical stabilizer here, this surface here, and the engines. And so that actually helped more bomber crews return safely. The next example, and I think this is a really useful one to show process and things that actually happened, documenting experience in real time on space stations, on one of the Soviet space stations from the 1970s. So the Soviet space program at the time used a tool called a cyclogram, which is a hand-drawn diagram to document activities in real time as they happened. This example is from the Apollo-Soyuz mission in 1975, where a US Apollo capsule and a Soviet Soyuz capsule docked in low Earth orbit. It was created for secret General Kerim Kerimov, who was the chief of the Soviet space program, so that he wouldn't ask as many questions, so that everything that happened during the mission could be documented. Now, the Soviet space program in the 1970s had shifted away from trying to get to the moon. The space race was already over. And so the Soviet space program was emphasizing long term missions in low Earth orbit. The main goal for the program was to understand space operations and the impact of microgravity on the human body over the long term. There was a series of space stations called Salyut. This Salyut 6 was the first long-term manned space station that the Soviets sent up. And there were two cosmonauts, Yuri Romanenko and Valery Grechko, who were the first crew. They arrived on December 10th, 1977, and they stayed for 96 days, which was a record at the time. And they produced this cyclogram to document their time in space. So this is essentially a long piece of graph paper where for the first 10 days or so, they had plotted out all of their activities that they expected to accomplish from launch day onward. And as you can see here, initially for the first 10 or 14 days or so, everything kind of proceeded according to plan. If you look closely, though, you can see going forward that there were a lot of crossouts as plans changed. So one task might have taken a little bit longer than it was expected, so the crew might have needed another rest day. Or there might have been something emergent that cropped up that they needed to do in place of another task. So they crossed out one task and replaced it with another one. The yellow and blue sections of the graph up top represent when the station was in light and in dark. So when you're orbiting in low Earth orbit, each day you have about 16 days during each 24-hour period, because you're seeing a sunrise about every 90 minutes and a sunset about every 90 minutes as well. So they're documenting that also. They're also showing major milestones as the mission proceeds. So they're showing International Women's Day, they're showing Army Day, they're showing New Year's Day, just to mark the time while they were in space. And what I think is so extraordinary about this is a living document that they added to and they would edit as they proceeded during their 96-day mission, but it still stands as an artifact of what they actually did in space. So what this solves for is a lot of things. It answers, well, what did you actually do when you were on your mission? How did you change different tasks as they needed to? How did you mark the time? So it's a really insightful and quite frankly beautiful piece. It was actually sold at auction in the last 10 years or so for about $50,000. So definitely an interesting piece of memorabilia, if nothing else. The next example is one that we're probably all quite familiar with, flattening the curve. So going back to 2020, if you remember when the novel coronavirus was identified early that year in Wuhan, China, and began spreading globally, by the second week in March, governments and businesses were contemplating taking pretty drastic measures to limit the spread of the disease. And what was really important at this point was conveying the urgency of the situation and the urgency of the need to socially distance and keep people at home and to really slow down or shut down a lot of things that were going on. So the result was this graphic that was created by the CDC, adapted by The Economist, and a lot of other entities, where we showed in the red area how many cases we would see over a short time without protective measures like social distancing and masking, versus with protective measures where we would still have a lot of cases, but we would be able to spread them over time so that they wouldn't overwhelm the healthcare system. And this was actually a really important graphic because it wasn't so much representing data that had actually been collected, but it was representing what experts thought the data would look like and showing the value of those protective measures. The next example I'd like to give you, I call "Take Me Out to, Not At the Ball Game." At the major league level, for those of you who aren't familiar with Major League Baseball in the US, there are 30 teams that play about 81 home games each season. There's also minor league levels of baseball where there are more teams, about 120 or so, that play slightly fewer games, but they attract a lot of people as well. At the major league level, the mean annual attendance is about 1.5 million per team. The range is between about 640,000 per year to about 2.8 million per year. And baseball teams have to balance safety with fan experience. Fans often like to sit close to the field so that they can see the players and be closer to what's going on during the game. But fans sitting in areas where players are likely to hit balls can be more susceptible to injuries. And a baseball coming off a bat, particularly at the major league level, is traveling very, very fast. It is a cork center wrapped very tightly with yarn and rubber with a leather covering over it. So being hit by a baseball can cause a pretty serious injury. Teams would issue warnings like this sign that you see here to be alert, but during the 2019 season, a rash of serious injuries were reported. NBC News reached out to first aid stations at all 30 major league ballparks and asked for emergency response records of fan injuries that had been caused by foul balls. There were only 4 agencies that responded in Miami, Oakland, California, Denver, Colorado, and Seattle, Washington. Some of the first aid stations said they didn't even track injuries from baseballs. So from those agencies, NBC News received records dating back to 2012, so 7 years, except for Coors Field in Denver that had numbers from 2014, 5 years. Tallying data from those 4 facilities, there were 700 reports of injuries from baseballs. And also NBC combed lawsuits, news reports, and social media posts to document an additional 107 injuries. So there were a total of 808. Most of them were from foul balls. Some of them were from home runs. And so NBC created the map that you see here, plotting the location of emergency service calls at each stadium. This is the example for Denver between the 2014 and 2019 seasons. Now, each call to the emergency, or rather to the first aid station, is noted in red. And where protective netting was located is shaded in blue here. So looking at this, it's interesting because it's showing us where injuries were reported. And an outcome of this project and the news reports and the concern about injuries in baseball stadiums was that the netting was actually extended from just to roughly where the bases were, all the way down to this corner of each field. So that now if you're sitting anywhere in any of these seats, you have protective netting in front of you that will prevent foul balls from being hit into the seats. Now, the only way to improve the impact of this visualization would be to ask what kind of injuries were reported. So are these injuries that are related directly to a foul ball being hit? Was it a line drive? What kind of injury was reported? Because what one would expect from these injuries out here is that if they're a home run that goes over the wall, they're probably hit on more of a slow parabolic trajectory, which means the fan might try to catch the ball or they might not have been able to move out of the way in time, but it might be an injury, for example, to a finger, or tripping over a seat as opposed to being hit in the head with a foul ball. So we'd need a little bit more detail to understand that. So turning on from those examples, I just wanted to offer some brief reflections about data visualization as you go forward into your capstone. The first is that simplicity is powerful, and in a lot of visualizations, we tend to trade aesthetics for the impact of the visualization and the clarity of the visualization. Also, through our study of audiences, the medium shapes the message, as does the audience. So we have a lot of control over the images and the visuals that we produce that help us shape our message and shape the insight. Visualization is also storytelling. And I hope that's something that you've seen throughout the program. Um, Next, your process matters, and something that I think you'll develop through this course and then going through the capstone is a sense of what your own process for data visualization, visual design, visual storytelling, that is unique to you, and it's important to do what works for you. And finally, that ethics are central, that as visualizers, we have a lot of power to shape the narrative, shape the interpretation of the data, and we really have an obligation to present our data fairly, to not overstate relationships or insights, but to really be an interpreter of those data. Finally, I wanted to address future directions, especially artificial intelligence. We haven't talked a lot about artificial intelligence in this course, other than about how you can apply it to your projects, developing text kind of within the framework that Mike has developed. But this is such a quickly evolving field that I think it's worth touching on. Where can we think of AI as data visualizers, and where can this be useful to us? And I'm recording this in the spring of 2025. We've already seen tremendous evolution in the last couple of years around not just the capabilities of AI, but our understanding of what it's good and not good for. So, based on where things stand right now, what is AI good for? It's really good for pattern identification and segmentation. From an analytics standpoint, it is quite good to generate code, at least as an initial draft. And it's pretty good for generating images, but with all of these, we need to beware of the intellectual property issues presented. And we also need to remember that uh, AI is not necessarily good as a turnkey tool. So if we're using it to generate code, we still need a human being to moderate it. We still need a human being to assess, will this code break something else that's been written? Is this code addressing our security concerns, our privacy concerns? We still need human moderation for that. And likewise with pattern identification and segmentation, AI is really valuable as often a first pass and as a time saving tool, as a way to help us think of segmentation, but often it benefits from human oversight to assess whether it's correct, whether it's useful or not. What is AI not good for? It's not really good for design and insight right now, from a data visualization perspective. It's not very good yet at grasping nuance. So it's good at segmenting, let's say, text responses based on categories that we feed to it. Um, but it's not necessarily good at grasping uh, very subtle differences and nuance just yet. It's also not great at applying domain knowledge. Uh, it will only apply the insight that it's been trained to apply. So it works based often on logic and inference, but not on any kind of deep experience. So that's just something to keep in mind. So, how should we approach AI as a visualization tool? I would consider it a tool in your toolbox for exploration and ideation, assistance with technical implementation like coding and segmentation. But again, make sure to maintain human oversight of that technical implementation, to combine AI strengths with human creativity, and to be explicit about the questions you're trying to answer. That's always a best practice for prompt engineering. Don't give a large language model a general question, but give it a pretty narrow one. And scope out narrow use cases. There are a lot of organizations that almost have a fear of missing out as AI continues to develop. But we don't just want to throw a lot of money at an AI large language model or at a solution that's developed by a particular third party. We want to really scope out how will AI help our business or our organization do their jobs better. Even looking further ahead beyond AI, data viz continues to evolve. We have new approaches to represent uncertainty and complexity. We have more accessible tools that democratize the creation of visualizations. So when I started doing this, really the people who had the best access to design tools were people who had come up through the graphic design field. Um, but right now we have access to things like Tableau, Power BI, Looker Studio that give access to many more people to design, to do visual data design. Now, that's both a blessing and a curse because if you don't really know what you're doing and you don't have the insights that you've built over the course of this program, it's very easy to create visualizations that might be misleading or overly complicated. But on balance, that's a good thing that these tools are more accessible. Um, we also have cross-disciplinary approaches that blend art, science, and design. That's what this whole technology is about, or this program is about, rather. And we're also developing interactive and immersive experiences through augmented and virtual reality technologies. So, all in the way of making information more visual and accessible and insightful. So, to wrap up here tonight, or this week rather, we've looked at 6 case studies of visualization in practice. We've looked at implications of artificial intelligence and other future directions. And I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for your hard work this term. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and that you've created a portfolio quality project that you're really happy with. Please do stay in touch. Please don't hesitate to reach out if I can ever be of assistance professionally or during your capstone. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And also, please fill out your course evaluation. You should be receiving your course evaluation shortly if you haven't already. And especially as Micah moves to an asynchronous model, your feedback is critical for improving the class experience. I take my evaluations very, very seriously. I read all of them, and I do my best to incorporate all of your feedback. And I would really hope, since this is the first time that we've delivered this course asynchronously, that you'll let me know what worked for you, what didn't work for you, so that the next cohort will benefit from those insights. So at this point, again, I wanted to thank you very much for all your hard work this week. I look forward to seeing your final project briefs and your critiques, and I will be coming up with grades shortly. But thank you again. Thank you for your attention, and best of luck in the capstone.